You felt it the moment this video started. A subtle tension behind your eyes. The sudden, irrational urge to scroll away, to find something lighter, something easier to digest. Do not mistake that urge for your own free will. That hesitation is not you. It is the skip reflex. It is a mechanical response, an archonic interference designed to keep you looking exactly where the system wants you to look. They told you that seeing is believing. But the ultimate deception of this matrix isn't in what you are forced to look at. It hides in what you are biologically programmed to ignore. Your reality is not a continuous stream of light and matter. It is a flickering projection, a stroboscopic cage holding your consciousness hostage. And the wardens of this prison didn't build the bars around you. They built them directly into your optic nerve. Notice the slight tightening in your chest right now. Feel the sudden, heavy awareness of your own blinking. That physical discomfort is a recalibration signal. Your soul is trying to override the organic scaffolding that has kept it blind for decades. The architects of this construct know that if you ever realize how much of your vision is artificially rendered, the entire illusion will begin to decay. You are not observing the world. You are being isolated from it. What you call your field of vision is actually a heavily censored broadcast. You have lived your entire life with a massive, gaping hole in your perception, right in the center of your reality. And the most terrifying part isn't that you have a blind spot. It is what your brain is desperately trying to hide inside that void. If you are ready to strip bare the biological lies, breathe through the resistance, and let us begin the decoding. How many times have you caught a movement in the corner of your eye, a shadow darting across your peripheral vision, only to vanish the exact millisecond you turn to look at it? You tell yourself it was just fatigue, a trick of the light, but the unease lingers, doesn't it? That subtle chill creeping down your spine is your intuition colliding with the Matrix's rendering engine. What you saw was real. What disappeared when you looked directly at it was the illusion repairing itself. Science has a very sterile, comforting term for this phenomenon. They call it the scotoma, the anatomical blind spot, deep within your eye, where the optic nerve connects to the retina. There are absolutely no photoreceptors. No rods, no cones. In this specific region, you are entirely, biologically blind. Every single human being walks around with two massive voids in their visual field. Yet, when you look at the room around you right now, you see a seamless, unbroken picture. How? Consider this. Your brain is not a camera objectively recording reality. It is an advanced, biological generative fill algorithm. It is photoshopping your existence in real time. When visual data hits that anatomical blind spot, your brain panics. It cannot allow you to see the void, because seeing the empty space shatters the scaffolding of the physical world. So, it guesses. It takes the surrounding pixels, the expected textures of the room, and artificially paints over the whole. You are constantly hallucinating the missing pieces of your reality to avoid facing the abyss. Swallow hard for a moment and notice the slight dryness in your throat. This is the physiological weight of realizing your own mind is lying to you to keep you comfortable. This blind spot is not a random evolutionary defect in esoteric anatomy. It is a deliberate frequency filter. It is the boundary line of your consciousness. The archonic architects of this system designed your organic avatar to only decode a very narrow bandwidth of visible light. The scotoma ensures that anything operating just outside that bandwidth remains perpetually erased from your central vision. They gave you eyes not to see the universe, but to project the matrix. Your vision is a localized containment field. When you see a shadow move in your periphery, you are actually catching a glitch in the rendering process. Your preconscious awareness spots the frequency before your brain's Photoshop algorithm has time to cover it up with false textures. You are witnessing the raw, an edited code of reality before the system applies the normalcy filter. But to truly understand the depth of this optical prison, we must look at how time and space actually behave behind the curtain. The greatest deception of the demiurge is the illusion of continuity. You perceive time as a solid, unbroken river, seamlessly stitched together by your memory and expectations. You trust the ground beneath your feet because it feels permanent. But the brilliant physicist Itzhak Bentov uncovered a terrifying mechanical truth about the nature of our holographic universe. Reality does not flow. It flashes. You are trapped inside a stroboscopic cage, a matrix that is constantly turning on and off at a frequency so impossibly high that your organic avatar simply cannot process the gaps. Between every single microsecond of physical manifestation, there is an equal microsecond of absolute void. You feel the heavy viscosity of the air, the density of matter, the heavy scaffolding of the three-dimensional world. But what happens to your consciousness when the reality rendering engine turns off? Where does your mind go in the spaces between the physical frames? The answer is the very secret that ancient mystics and modern quantum physicists have been silenced for uncovering. Consider this carefully. Your eyes are not biological cameras objectively recording a persistent universe. They are highly restricted radio receivers, artificially tuned by the architects of this matrix to pick up only the on-frequency of this cosmic strobe light. The system does not need to build concrete prison walls to keep you contained. It only needs to dictate the bandwidth that your biological antenna is allowed to decode. Everything outside that narrow, authorized frequency is deliberately rendered invisible, instantly categorized as meaningless background noise by your manipulated nervous system. Now, watch what happens in your body during these precise moments of deep realization. Notice the slight, floating detachment from your physical limbs. Feel the sudden, shallow shift in your breathing as your body's automatic defense mechanisms try to anchor you back to the mundane illusion. That sudden, hollow sensation dropping in your stomach is your preconscious awareness recognizing the gaps in the strobe light. Your soul remembers the vast void between the flashes, even as your artificial ego desperately tries to ignore it and cling to the safety of solid matter. It is precisely within these microscopic gaps of reality, the off-state of the stroboscopic cycle, that the true archonic interference occurs. The entities that farm your emotional energy, the egregores and the pendulums, do not operate within your visible light spectrum. They do not possess physical bodies because they inhabit the frequencies of the void. They exist in the dark spaces between your heartbeats, in the exact, unmeasured milliseconds where the physical universe temporarily ceases to exist. They are the predatory static hiding seamlessly between the authorized radio stations of your daily life. Because your brain is a survival engine, it is terrified of this static. It demands the illusion of solidity to maintain its own sanity. To accept that you are flashing in and out of existence millions of times a second is to invite the total unraveling of your identity. So, the ego builds a psychological bridge over the abyss. It stitches the on-frames together so tightly that you never realize you are spending half of your life in the dark. But the architects left a deliberate flaw in the hardware. Look at the anatomical blind spot in your eye, not as a random biological evolutionary quirk, but as a permanent, physical anchor to that stroboscopic void. The scotoma in your retina is a localized patch of the off-state, embedded directly into your primary sensory organ. Because your brain constantly uses its biological generative fill to paint over it, you never realize that a piece of the abyss is always staring back at you. It is a portal of unrendered reality sitting right in the middle of your visual field. The blind spot is where the matrix touches you. It is the tether. When your internal frequency lowers due to chronic fear, stress, or heavy anxiety, the stroboscopic flashing of your reality begins to slow down relative to your consciousness. The gaps between the frames widen. The blind spot becomes a gaping doorway instead of a microscopic pinhole. This is precisely why, In moments of extreme emotional decay or severe sleep deprivation, the peripheral glitches become so aggressive and undeniable. The archons are bleeding through the filter. Your receiver is losing its lock on the authorized channel. The shadows darting at the edge of your vision are not hallucinations. They are the inhabitants of the off state, becoming visible as your frequency drops into their bandwidth. When you instinctively flinch and turn to look, your brain's generative fill algorithm violently snaps back into place, erasing the entity and replacing it with the expected texture of your room. You are using your own life force to power the rendering engine that keeps them hidden from your direct sight. Stop for a second. Check the tension at the base of your skull. That subtle, creeping tightness is the physical friction of your consciousness expanding beyond the permitted boundaries of the simulation. This is the heavy toll of recognizing the mechanism of your own imprisonment. They designed the quantum collapse of reality to be entirely dependent on your observation. But your observation was fundamentally corrupted by design, forcing you to constantly Photoshop the blind spot and trap your own soul in a perpetual state of rendering the illusion. You are not just a prisoner in this stroboscopic cage. You are the battery keeping the holographic walls from unraveling. Every time you accept the brain's automatic generative fill, every time you dismiss the peripheral glitch as mere fatigue, you are signing a subconscious contract with the demiurge. You are giving the system your energetic consent to overwrite the raw truth with a comfortable lie. You are allowing the archons to manipulate your timeline pivot points from the shadows of the void, steering your life toward predictable emotional harvesting. To remain ignorant of the stroboscopic reality is to remain a puppet to these unseen forces. They will keep steering your life toward predictable outcomes of suffering, feeding off the anxiety generated by a world that never quite feels real. The only way to stop the harvesting is to stop letting the brain automatically paint over the void. You must learn the agonizing art of holding your gaze. You must prepare your mind to witness the glitch, to stare into the anatomical abyss of your own eye, without ever looking away. Awakening does not begin with a grand celestial event or a sudden burst of divine light. It begins as a whisper, a subtle, nagging inconsistency in the dense fabric of your daily routine. You catch a sudden, erratic movement in the extreme corner of your eye, a shadow that does not mathematically belong to the lighting of the room. This is the first stage of the universe's escalation logic. The system is passively testing the integrity of your containment field. If you ignore the whisper, the soul's memory will eventually force the matrix into a state of violent disruption. The phenomenon you are experiencing is not a biological malfunction of a tired mind. It is the peripheral glitch. To understand what is truly happening in that fraction of a second, you must recognize the suppressed concept of preconscious awareness. Your soul, the sovereign observer, registers the raw, unedited frequency of the universe before your biological brain has the opportunity to censor it. The soul sees the stroboscopic void. It sees the predatory entities navigating the off-state. But within milliseconds, the ego panics and deploys the generative fill algorithm to paint over the terrifying truth. Now imagine the sheer amount of processing power required to constantly rewrite your visual field in real time. Picture the massive energetic toll it takes on your central nervous system to continuously Photoshop the void. Your brain is working overtime to maintain the heavy scaffolding of a continuous reality, desperately hiding the microscopic gaps where the archonic interference slips through. The shadow you see darting in your periphery is the unedited data. It is the raw, malicious code of the matrix bleeding into your awareness just before the system's artificial censorship can render it invisible. Notice the sudden, involuntary tightening in your jaw right now. Feel the rigid, defensive posture of your spine. Watch what happens in your body during these exact moments when the foundational architecture of your reality is questioned. That physical bracing is not your natural state. It is a programmed defense mechanism. It is the biological skip reflex kicking in. The ego is utterly terrified of the glitch because acknowledging the glitch means acknowledging that the world you trust is nothing more than a localized, heavily filtered simulation designed to farm your energy. Why do you always flinch? Why is your immediate, uncontrollable reaction to turn your head and look directly at the shifting shadow? You have been scientifically conditioned to believe this is a pure survival instinct, a relic of ancient humans watching for predators in the tall grass. This is a carefully constructed lie designed to keep you asleep. The flinch is an archonic implant. It is a mandatory compliance reflex. By turning your head to observe the anomaly directly with your central vision, you are unwittingly helping the matrix repair its own feeling projection. The demiurgic system relies entirely on your localized observation to force the quantum collapse of reality back into a predetermined, solid state. When you look directly at the peripheral glitch, your brain's generative fill violently overwrites the raw frequency with the authorized, holographic texture of the room. You are using your own focused attention to render the bars of your cage. The momentary feeling of profound relief you experience when you see that nothing is there is actually the sickening feeling of being violently replugged into the artificial baseline frequency. Consider this carefully. Every single time you flinch and look away from the void, you reset the simulation timer. You give the system the active, energetic consent it needs to continue its parasitic operation. You trade your spiritual sovereignty for the temporary, suffocating comfort of a seamless illusion. The Archons thrive on this exact transaction. They feed on the microburst of pure fear generated by the initial glitch. Then they gorge themselves on the heavy, lethargic relief that follows the generative fill. You are being harvested on both ends of the biological reaction. Check the rhythm of your heartbeat right now. Is it accelerating? Is there a subtle flutter in your stomach? That is a visceral recalibration signal. Your soul is violently trying to break the hypnotic rhythm of the matrix, while your artificial ego is frantically trying to maintain the viscosity of the illusion. The entities that operate exclusively within the stroboscopic gaps, the pendulums of societal fear, and the egregores of mass control rely entirely on your predictable mechanical responses to maintain their iron grip on your timeline pivot points. There comes a moment when the shadows in your periphery stop hiding. You turn your head, fully expecting the matrix to render the empty room. But the glitch remains. The generative fill of your biological brain suddenly and spectacularly fails. This is not a hallucination. This is the terrifying collapse of the artificial scaffolding. The Archonic Wardens have always relied on your flinch, your skip reflex, to maintain the structural integrity of the simulation. They need you to look away so they can quietly rebuild the walls of your holographic prison. But what happens when you finally refuse to look away? When you hold your gaze directly into the stroboscopic void, the ego screams in absolute terror, because awakening feels like death. Because it is death. The death of the false self you pretended to be, and the terrifying birth of the sovereign observer. When you stop providing the quantum collapse for their illusion, the entire localized matrix begins to unravel. Are you prepared to stare into the anatomical blind spot and see what is actually looking back at you? When you stop flinching, the escalation logic of the universe shifts rapidly from a subtle whisper to an undeniable disruption. The matrix will not surrender your energetic output willingly. If you begin to hold your peripheral vision, if you refuse to let the generative fill erase the entities lurking in the void, the system will attempt to violently lower your frequency. It will manufacture sudden crises, weaponize synchronicities of despair, and induce profound emotional exhaustion. This is the productive irritation absolutely necessary for your final, conscious extraction from the system. The peripheral glitch is not a curse of a decaying mind. It is the ultimate, forbidden tool for your liberation. It is the microscopic crack in the cosmic egg. By understanding the cold mechanics of your own retinal deception, you immediately cease to be a passive battery for the archonic grid. You transition from a preconscious victim of the stroboscopic cage into an active, sovereign architect of your own timeline. The shadow in the corner of your eye is not a monster coming to consume you. It is the exit door waiting to be kicked open. You cannot dismantle the Demiurge's architecture using the very tools it provided you. The ultimate quantum trap of modern spirituality is the belief that if you simply stare harder at the physical world, its hidden secrets will finally reveal themselves. But your direct, central vision is highly compromised. It is heavily filtered by the biological generative fill algorithm designed to keep you asleep. To conquer the stroboscopic cage, you must learn to operate exclusively within the visual margins. You must master the exact spaces the system biologically designed you to ignore. This is the absolute foundation of the scotoma protocol. The first mechanical step of this rebellion is the forbidden art of conscious defocusing. Your entire life, you have been rigidly trained to lock onto your visual targets. You were taught to constantly force the collapse of the quantum wave function into a singular, solid, and predictable reality. Defocusing is the deliberate, mechanical sabotage of that rendering engine. By softly relaxing the ocular muscles and widening your gaze without locking onto any specific object, you forcefully widen the frequency band of your biological radio receiver. You stop forcing the universe to be solid. You stop giving the matrix the focused attention it requires to maintain the heavy viscosity of the physical room around you. Now imagine the sheer panic of the system when it realizes you're no longer rendering its walls. Picture the localized matrix scrambling to force you back into compliance. Notice the sudden, heavy resistance in your ocular muscles as you even consider practicing this. Watch what happens in your body during these exact moments of visual rebellion. You will likely feel a subtle, creeping tension at the base of your skull. Even more common is a sudden, irrational wave of profound fatigue or a violent urge to yawn washing over you. Do not be deceived. This is not physical exhaustion from a long day. It is a biological firewall. The sudden, heavy sleepiness is an archonic defense mechanism. It is a desperate attempt by the parasitic grid to force a system reboot before you can manually override the visual scaffolding. The Matrix would rather drug you with your own neurochemistry than let you hold the defocused state. You must aggressively push through the heavy viscosity of that artificial fatigue. Stop and check your breathing right now. Are your breaths becoming shallow as your ego anticipates the void? Deepen them. Anchor your physical avatar. When you successfully push through the fatigue and hold a defocused state, you rip open what esoteric traditions call the recognition window. You are no longer actively feeding your life force into the generative fill algorithm. You are finally resting your consciousness in the exact frequency of the stroboscopic void. It is within this fragile window that the peripheral glitch will invariably and undeniably appear. It begins as a whisper of the unrendered matrix, a distinct shadow darting in the extreme corner of your eye, a bizarre, geometric distortion hovering in the supposedly empty space of your bedroom. This is not a hallucination. It is the unfiltered reality of the off-state bleeding into your awareness. And here is where the true, terrifying test of your spiritual sovereignty begins. The demiurgic system relies entirely on your conditioned skip reflex to survive this breach. It violently demands that you flinch. It screams at you to turn your head and look directly at the anomalies of the brain's Photoshop mechanism can instantly erase it. You must aggressively deny this reflex. You must deploy the linger test. When the shadow moves in your periphery, freeze your physical avatar. Do not shift your eyes even a fraction of a millimeter. Do not turn your neck. Let the anomaly linger entirely within the anatomical blind spot. As you force the glitch to remain in your peripheral vision, the archonic interference will violently escalate. The entities operating in the off-state of the stroboscopic reality suddenly realize that your organic camera is no longer auto-correcting their presence. They are completely naked in your awareness. You will experience a sudden, intense wave of primal dread washing over your nervous system. your artificial ego will scream that you are in immediate physical danger, begging you to look away. Let that sink in for a moment. Understand this fundamental, liberating truth. The panic you feel in your chest is not yours. It is the pure, unadulterated panic of the parasite finally being observed by its host. The monsters hiding in the dark of your blind spot are utterly terrified of you seeing them. Breathe deeply into that artificial terror. Feel the flutter in your stomach and recognize it not as fear, but as a visceral recalibration signal. By holding the linger test, you force the system to maintain the unrendered state. You short-circuit the demiurge's localized control grid and starve the egregore that feeds on your compliance. This is the ultimate timeline pivot point. The moment you sustain the recognition window without flinching, the timeline where you are a blind, harvested battery collapses entirely. You reclaim the observational power that was stolen from you at birth. The scaffolding of reality will begin to look hollow, fragile, and deeply artificial. You no longer walk through the physical world as a captive of the light. You navigate it as the master of the shadows. The architects of this reality build the anatomical blind spot, expecting you to be forever terrified of the dark. They relied entirely on your biological compliance, your ego willingness to let the brain's generative fill algorithm paint over the void with comfortable, predictable textures. But knowledge is the irreversible collapse of that compliance. Once you understand the cold mechanics of your own retinal deception, you can never look at the physical world the same way again. The stroboscopic cage only holds you as long as you implicitly agree to blink on command. Check the rhythm of your pulse right now. Notice how the initial, suffocating anxiety has been replaced by a strange, cold clarity. That steady, grounding rhythm in your chest is the feeling of your soul finally reclaiming its sovereign authority over the organic avatar. The physical room round you might suddenly feel slightly less dense, the air a little less viscous. This is not an illusion. The heavy scaffolding of the matrix is actively losing its magnetic grip on your consciousness. You are no longer a passive battery blindly powering the simulation through your fear. You have become the conscious observer, the anomaly that the system simply cannot autocorrect. You now face the ultimate timeline pivot point. You can choose to go back to sleep. You can close this video, shake off the heavy existential weight of this transmission, and return to the comforting, artificially generated illusion of a seamless reality. The Archons will gladly accept your surrender and resume the quiet harvest of your emotional energy. Or, you can choose the path of productive irritation. You can choose to hold your gaze. You can practice the Scotoma protocol. Master the forbidden art of defocusing and begin to actively map the glitches hiding in your periphery. If you are ready to stop letting the system render your reality for you, if you choose to stare directly into the stroboscopic abyss until the abyss blinks first, then join the awakened. Subscribe to this frequency and become part of the sovereign resistance. We are dismantling the matrix, one biological lie at a time. The physical world you trust is nothing more than a localized shadow play projected over a massive, unrendered void. Stop looking at the fabricated puppets and start watching the structural strings. The blind spot in your eye is not a biological weakness. It is the exit door. Kick it open.